want to help you understand the difference between an Azure App Gateway and the Azure Front Door, because these two particular topics can definitely be confusing. They almost sound like they do the same thing. So we want to make sure that we're clear on that. So to start with, what is the Azure Application Gateway? So the Azure Application Gateway is a load balancer, all right, and it has the ability to operate at the 7th layer of the OSI model, whereas a traditional load balancer operates at the 4th layer of the OSI model. Okay, it has the ability to route traffic based on a source IP, destination IP, the port number, but it also has the ability to make decisions based on the HTTP or HTTPS request based on the URI path or URL, Uniform Resource Locator, Uniform Resource Identifier path. Okay, so that is that's the idea there. Whereas a traditional load balancer is just going to basically make decisions on source IP, destination, port, the App Gateway can make decisions based on the actual DNS type name that was typed in. So what is Azure Front Door? So Azure Front Door, this is a newer technology that is Microsoft's official CDN, Content Delivery Network, if you're familiar with that term. The idea of a content delivery network is to be able to route web-based traffic all over the world as quickly as possible, especially when you're dealing with lots of dynamic content. All right, so lots of images that are changing and video is changing. It's very, very oriented towards web content. So not just the DNS name and stuff people are typing in, but actual web content, aiming towards images and video and audio and things like that. So the Front Door also works with Microsoft's Global Edge Network and their partners. So you have a lot of point of presences all over the world that you can route traffic through the Azure network all over the world. So it will go through the Azure network to wherever the destination is. It also means that somebody out on the internet that's going to your web service can type a name in, it gets routed to the Azure network, and then through the Azure network on their high-speed networks to your location, wherever that's at, whatever region your web services is running in. But what's the difference? So the Azure Front Door and the App Gateway, they're both Layer 7 load balancer based technologies. Front Door is geared as a global service that is oriented towards web applications, web images, audio, video. An App Gateway is a regional service, so it is oriented towards a region of the world that you are handling traffic. So it's best if you are looking at it from a smaller perspective. App Gateway is going to be a cheaper solution. For example, if I'm selling, I don't know, let's say tractor parts for rural Montana here in the United States, and I know that my majority of what I'm selling on the internet is going to be geared towards that region of the world, and App Gateway is going to be a better solution. But if I'm a worldwide organization doing lots of traffic for web applications or web images and all that, then Front Door is going to be a better solution. Front Door does what's called path-based load balancing in a global level that is oriented towards just people being all over the world, whereas your Application Gateway is geared towards regional. It's perfect for specific VNets that are going to be tied to a regional area, and you need to route traffic to that. So that's the idea. If you look at the diagrams towards the bottom, you're looking at an Application Gateway scenario on the left there, and then the Front Door scenario is on the right. So you can see there's a lot more going on that Front Door scenario, where somebody's, in this example, trying to go to www.contoso.com. They could be anywhere in the world. It routes into the edge of the Azure network, and the Azure network is going to route traffic to wherever region it's supposed to go, pull those images. And the other thing that Azure does with this content delivery network in Front Door is images can be cached near wherever that person is. So if you're talking about the East US being your region where your web application is, but or web service is, and then maybe the user who is going to your website is in Brazil, then the content delivery network nearest Brazil can cache the images and deliver those images quicker. So that's the idea of the Front Door. the front door is, again, in most cases, going to be more expensive than a web app gateway as far as load balancing. But hopefully that helps you now kind of get a feel for the difference between those two. Let's take a look now at creating an application gateway load balancer in Azure. So here we are on portal.azure.com. Going to click the menu button and go to All Services, and I'm just going to search for the word Load Balancer, and if we look over here to the right, we can see Application Gateway. So we'll select that, and we're going to click Create Application Gateway. Keep in mind, there are no such things as a free application gateway, so you might want to look at the Azure pricing calculator to get a better feel for this, okay? So here I would choose my resource group. All right, let's say VM destination, application gateway name. I'm going to call it App Gateway Demo. All right. Region, we'll say East US, and then you got your tier. So you can look at the different tiers right here, learn more about the tier differences, all right, that are available to you. So supporting auto scaling and manual scaling and all that stuff. And of course, you know, the tier is also going to involve the cost, so you'd want to look at this on the Azure calculator to see the big cost there. And do you want to have auto scaling? Yes. So one of the things about the application gateway is that the application gateway can generate more instances of itself. All right. You automatically get a couple of these anyway. One's an active one and one's a passive, but you can also have multiple active application gateways running at the same time, and it'll even you know, both of them can accept traffic simultaneously. If one fails, the other one takes all the traffic for load balancing and all that. So that is what you're going to get out of that. So for standard also, and then also your application gateway can also do web application firewall capabilities as well, and that's where you get into these. Of course, again, you need to look at the pricing calculator because that gets more expensive as you play around with that, some of the different capabilities. Right now we're just focused on the load balancing. So then you have your minimum instance counts here, you know, minimum instance count from 0 to 10. So they tell you right there that you can have more capacity, which is maintained irrespective of the traffic. 0 basically signifies purely auto-scaling application gateway with no additional reserved capacity, while still maintaining high availability services. All right. So when you think about the instances here, you go back over here and look at this right here. All right. They tell you that with the auto scaling, you're going to have multiple instances, right? Multiple instances of your load balancer in their service. And they tell you right here, it says an Azure Application Gateway instance that can support around 10 capacity units. So depending upon how much traffic you typically have, you might want to configure your minimum instance auto scaling setting to a value higher than 2. For scale-in events, Application Gateway will drain existing connections for 5 minutes on the instances that are subject to removal. So it all depends on how much load that you're getting in your environment with the Application Gateway, on how many instances of this it's gonna be utilizing. These application gateways are actually running on virtual machines, and so they scale them out very much like a scale set in order to handle all of that. Okay. All right, so then from there, if I want to have availability zones, I can. That adds even more redundancy. And then here, am I going to support HTTP2 or just standard? So right here, it tells you the HTTP2 protocol is available for clients that connect to Application Gateway listeners only. The communication to the backend pool is over HTTP 1.1. By default, HTTP2 is disabled. And then you can specify virtual network. So what virtual network this is going to tie to, your addressing system, and then go from there. Now, there is a catch to this. They do warn you about this. When you are specifying a virtual network, it tells you the subnet must only have application gateway. That means you have to have a subnet that just has the application gateway on it. And that is something I would remember if I were you. So I'm actually going to create a new VNet. I'm going to call this the App Gateway VNet. All right, and then we could specify the addressing system we want. We're going to do 10.20 will be the addressing system. That'll be a /16. Subnet name will be app gateway subnet. The address space will be 10.20.00/24. You really don't need that many addresses, considering you're just putting the gateway on there, but I've allocated that many addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And at that point, I'm going to click Next and go to front ends. So here I am deciding what my front end address is going to be. If it's going to be a public IP address that I'm accepting traffic from the internet, I'm going to choose public. If I'm going to do private, if it's just for internal use, I would choose that. If I want to do both, I can do both. I'm going to do public, and we'll add a pip. I'm going to call it app gateway pip. All right. That's fine. I'm going to click OK to that. It's creating a new pip, and I'm going to click Next to go to backend. So here's my backend pool. This is just like the standard load balancer. I'm going to choose the backend devices. So I would click Add. I would specify a name, backend pool. It says Add backend pool without targets. So if I've got targets, I can go ahead and select. I can go ahead and specify those. What's neat about, one of the things that's really neat about the app gateways is that they can do IP addresses just like a standard load balancer, but you can also point directly to a virtual machine. You can do a virtual machine scale set, so you can point to those, or you can even load balance app services that are out there. So that's really cool. Okay. All right. So I am going to, we're going to say just go ahead and create without the backend pool, since I don't really have my virtual machines set up. I'm going to click Next. And then at that point, I get to configure these here. So I've got front end routing rules and back end pools. Now I do need to say this is another one of those things in Azure that's constantly changing. You've probably heard me say that before. These screens are constantly changing, so do not be surprised if any point in this your screens may look a little different than mine. It does not matter how frequently I update my videos week after week. It's still, they change everything, it seems like, every week. So just be on the lookout for that. The key here is we're learning the concepts, though. So I've got my front end, right? That's going to show what's here. I've got my back end. That shows right there. So the next thing I've got is routing rules, and that's how we want to route our traffic, right? So we'll click Add. Okay, give it a name. I'm going to call it LB routing. That's load balancing routing. And then you can have different priorities for your rules if you want. So you can specify what you want your priorities to be. And they tell you right here, the priority value should be between 1 and 20,000. The lower the number, the higher the priority. Okay. So here's my first rule. What do you want your listener name to be? We'll say HTTP is my listener. All right. And then I would specify my front end IP, and I'm doing port 80. Okay, listener type is basic. They tell you here, if you're hosting a single site behind the application gateway, you're going to choose basic. If you're going to be configuring more than one web application or like have multiple DNS names, that's when you would want to go with multi-site. And then you can also even have an error page URL here that you can specify. So if you have a web developer who sets you up like some error pages, you could point to those right here. At that point, we would click Add. Oh, I forgot about my back-end targets here. So, so we did our listener. Let's click our back-end targets. So from there, it says target type, your back-end pool, or you want to redirect somewhere else. So my back-end pool, this is what I'm generally going to do is I'm wanting, remember, traffic to come in through the front end, and I want it to then be directed to the back-end pool. The back-end pool would be your virtual machines or websites or web servers that are accepting the traffic, right? In this case, I'm going to specify backend pool. If I wanted to redirect it somewhere else, like to a completely different external site, I can actually put in a URL for that external site right there. But in this case, we'll say backend pool. And then backend settings, if I want to add some additional backend settings here, I can specify those. So I can go here and I can say, we'll say this backend config, and then the protocol is HTTP port 80, and then cookie affinity. Now, cookie affinity it simply means that we are accepting cookies by the site, by the web server. And what that'll try to do is it'll try to make sure that when the client connects, the client always goes to the same web server based on its cookie. Most of the time, you don't want that turned on unless there's a particular reason that your web application needs to talk to a specific server. You want to avoid turning this on. And then you got what's called connection draining. So they tell you the idea there is this is so if you've got a bunch of connections occurring to your different web servers, this is a way of removing a backend pool member, basically one of the machines in the backend pool. It's a way to gracefully remove it without losing your connection. So if you had to take one of your virtual machines offline or something, you can have it removed and it will drain those connections off and redirect them somewhere else without just deregistering it immediately, deregistering the instance of the virtual machine and causing those clients to get an error before retrying and connecting. So this is something that you can do. You can turn this feature on. They do tell you here that this applies to backend instances that are explicitly removed from a backend pool via some kind of like an API call, an application programming interface call, and it goes by the health probe. So you can turn that feature on if you want, and you can set the time period you want the draining to occur. Then you have request timeout. That's keep alives. If request times out, so they tell you here if a request times out, it's basically going to be the amount of seconds that your app gateway is going to wait when it receives a response from like a backend pool before it throws a connection timeout message. And then from there, you've got override backend path. So if you look there, they tell you that this is going to override the path in the URL so that if a request for a specific path can be routed to another path, then it'll override that path. So for example, if you are going to a website, like let's say you're going to examlabpractice.com, and I'm trying to display on my website, examlabpractice.com, I'm trying to display something, but what I want to display is actually coming from a totally different website. And I want to be able to hide that URL name. I want to hide that domain name. I can have these paths overwritten. So if you look at their example, they say if you intend to route requests from contoso.com/images to default, then enter / in the text box. Subsequently attach this HTTP setting to the rule will be associated to contoso.com/images. So you're able to not display a specific path if you want. You can have it not display a full path. You could redirect somewhere else if you've got a website that's displaying some text that's being mapped from somewhere else, or an image that's being mapped from somewhere else. It can appear as though it's coming from your site. All right, and so I could just put a / there if I want. Again, this is more one of those things that you really have to talk to your web developer to decide whether or not you're going to want to do that. Okay, some of this stuff we IT people don't deal with a whole lot because it depends on the web developer who has developed your site. All right, and then there you have the host name. It tells you here by default the application gateway does not change the incoming HTTP host headers from the client. Okay, so that's what I was getting into about changing about names by default. If you've got a link on your site that links to a different website to display an image or something, it's going to display that other website's name. If you want to override that, you can. You can actually make it where your DNS name will override it. So they tell you here, by default, the application gateway does not change the incoming HTTP host header from the client and sends the header unaltered to the back end. All right. So whatever somebody's name, whatever link or URL that's being used, it's going to display that outright, even if it's from a different website. If you want to override it and make it appear as though, instead of, if I've got examlabpractice.com/image.jpg, and really that image is coming from contoso.com/image.jpg, I could make it appear as though the image was coming from examlabpractice.com as opposed to Contoso. So that's what that has to do with. Again, you really have to work with a web developer on whether or not some of these features are going to be helpful to you. So then at that point, we click add to that. We'll click add, and we've got our routing rules. And then finally, if we had any tags, we could specify tags. We review and create, and then we can create the app gateway. Now, remember, be careful with this one. It is going to cost you some money when you activate it, and another kind of forewarning, it does take about 15-20 minutes to set the application gateway up, so it's going to take a while to process before it finishes. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want you to know that I'm trying really hard to grow this channel, so I hope you'll give me a like and a subscribe. Also, if you'll check the description in this video, I've got a link for you that can show you how you can get access to all my different courses. I have lots of different Microsoft certification courses that'll help you pass your exam. All right, thanks a lot for watching the video, and I hope to see you again.